that made you feel like this is what I want to do?
Justin, you said you love Triumph of the Will, right?
Yeah.
Just watched it
I don't
over
know
and
what
over.
that is. What is that?
You're like, I want to be Lenny Riefenstahl.
Oh, Triumph of the Will. Yes.
You said
Yeah.
Triumph of the Will and the Fountainhead were like just your jam.
Yeah. Yeah.
To her credit, she was a good filmmaker.
Yeah. uh,
Knowing how to sell an idea is pretty key as an artist. You know.
Okay, let's go into Nazi apologism. That's how
Yeah.
we're going. All right.
movies that made me want to be a filmmaker, probably anything by Richard Linklater, almost anything by Danny Boyle, Lord of the Rings, lots and lots and lots of other ones, but those are the first ones that jumped to my mind. Usually filmmakers that just they have something to say and it's personal.
Yeah. And I've seen you compared. You've been compared to Linklater. Spring has been compared to that, and it's I guess atmosphere and pacing and how it's like kind of I guess more thoughtful, more intellectual in certain ways. So basically, people with unique visions. So you're like, this is I can completely express my vision in this way.
Yeah. I even in big popcorn movies, I respect it so much more when I can feel a personal touch and that I see the filmmaker in it.
Yeah. How about other art, as in literature or music both of you that inspires you guys?
That was kind of I was kind of wondering what exactly it was that got me into film. For me, it was a person. It was a friend of mine, invited me over one time and we did stop action movies and like almost immediately, like maybe even that day.
Oh, cool. Like animation?
Yeah, we did like stop action Star Wars.
What did you do it with? Clay or?
Star Wars action figures.
Nice. That's awesome.
But it wasn't like a frame per second. It was like a quarter second per second because it was like one of those old things. So you can hear us talking, and it's just and it's like and they just don't move right because we didn't have a tripod, so the camera's like doing this, which it shouldn't do in stop action. But you get the idea well enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually funny to watch those tapes again because you can see my like sixth grade self saying the word shit behind the camera because I like tripped or something when I did it, and it's just like, my voice hasn't cracked yet. But that was what got me into filmmaking. But I think like this particular thing, it was never really horror films. In fact, frankly, I should not even say this, but I never really cared for horror films at all, and still haven't seen a lot of like the classics, and they never really interested me. And what can you do? I was a kid. You can't make someone be interested in something. But I read a lot of Stephen King. And I still watched creature features, but they weren't like B movies. I'm talking about like Jurassic Park. Like I'm talking about like that kind of thing where the schlock wasn't the up front and center like shtick of it. The shtick of Jurassic Park is a bunch of really good characters in a really interesting, fantastic situation.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's kind of the same thing with Stephen King books, and that's what keeps me coming back, I think. That's a giant mug.
Yeah.
The only one drinking out of a mason jar. You guys have these beautiful mugs, and I've got a
You need some grain alcohol in that. That looks like you need like moonshine.
Yeah. 10:24 a.m.
All right, let's see. Was this movie hard to market because of it being kind of straddling genres the way it is?
No, I mean it's definitely a discussion that's had with the marketing department of the distributor over, what genre you're going to sell it as, for sure. Yeah. That didn't make it more difficult. I'd say that the greater difficulty in selling independent films in the year 2015 is just that, just straight up, the marketing budgets they're usually tiny. So your manpower is your filmmaking team, which is kind of fun too in a way. But that's I'd say like the greatest challenge involved with all of it is that as if you're a director, you should be a generalist. You should know how to do lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things. You have to continue to learn how to do lots and lots and lots of things. A lot of these things have nothing to do with what's you're presenting in front of a camera.
Mm-hmm.
And marketing publicity is one of those things.
Yeah. Well,
and today, more than ever, as a filmmaker, you need to know how to do marketing and publicity and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's fun. It's a little stress. It's like any job. You have stressful moments, but yeah, I'd say that the biggest challenge in the marketing of Spring was just the fact that you need to be so involved as a filmmaker nowadays. And that's probably one of the main places where you really are kind of like stumbling through it. It was our second movie, so at least we kind of had a handle on it. But yeah, I think that would probably be a greater challenge than the fact that you can't sell it as just a straight horror film.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of, I think what I loved about the movie was that it was straddling genres, and it reminds me of there's this genre, this sort of cult genre of fiction called bizarro fiction. I don't know if you've heard of it. But that's kind of, this horror writer, Brian Keene, basically describes it as they are the genre fuckers. And and you guys are like the genre benders with this. So I think that's something very modern, actually. We live in an age, ever since past the 80s, where you can pretty much look at all the past media that has existed. And I think people growing up in that time forward, kind of, you blend everything in your brain. Mm-hmm. So a movie like this is like, it's so timely because it shows that it's about expression, it's about story, it's about characters, and the definitions that we have where we try to categorize everything in neat little boxes just aren't relevant to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the movie itself actually has to do with how we kind of try to categorize things. Try to say, this is how things happen scientifically, or this is what the mysterious things are, and you're just kind of just like smashing it all. Like it's about everything. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I really loved it. Let's see. Let me think of an actual question. That wasn't the question.
Actually, kind of following on what you just said, I remember when we were talking about, what the movie is and what it's about and what we wanted to say with it. I remember a big discussion is that here we are making a love story and what's been said about love that hasn't been said before, and what can we say in a monster movie that we couldn't say without one, that kind of thing. And it was something where we're filmmakers that in some ways can be a bit anti-cinematic on purpose. And so, there's this save the cat idea of like, what's your theme of your movie and everything stems out of the theme. And actually, I don't disagree with that. And our movie does do that, but there was something that didn't quite follow in our minds, which is a theme is something that can be expressed in a pithy little saying that you've heard before. And that didn't quite jive for us. It's like, I think themes can and should be very complicated. I shouldn't say complicated, complex. Complicated feels more like convoluted. Complex is like something where it has depth.
Yeah.
And so, you could say like love is patient or love requires sacrifice or something like that. And what we wanted to kind of get at was something like love is a big ball of things, like a ball of yarn that is interconnected in extraordinarily mysterious ways that trying to pull it apart and trying to compartmentalize why it works and why you should build a case for why you should be in love with someone. Oh, because they made that sacrifice or something as clear as that. And it's just, or like, why should Louise be in love with Lou? Or Evan, that doesn't make any sense, but she is. And that's just what happened. And, it makes a little more sense he's in love with her, but the reversal of, why would her body choose to give that up you know, I mean, they get along really well. You can tell they get along really well, but you know, there's no outside of that. There's not a whole lot of qualities that you know that are just like okay, clearly, you know, cut and dry. You can make a screenwriting case for why. And that meant a lot to us that we were able to kind of show that sometimes people just work together and because they just do, and not because they're the two stars of the movie, but because they just do.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and that they don't. It's really that third act where they spend even more time hanging out with each other and talking to each other about things that have nothing to do with love. It's just they're just hanging out, getting to know each other. That's where Louise's body, after all of that, makes a decision, or you know, we determine that she is actually in love with him, and it's just because they spent time together and they talked a lot and they communicated and all these things.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because there are certain, I mean, there are blogs out there that say that the movie is like profoundly sexist because Louise is so great and she should and of course the storytellers have a great woman fall in love with this loser as male wish fulfillment. And thus the movie's horribly sexist. And it's like, well...
He's a nice guy, though.
It's a little bit shallow. It's like, dude, he's not that bad of a guy. I mean,
I'm sorry he can't play basketball. Like...
He's a totally nice guy.
Sorry, you know?
He listens, he asks her questions about herself. He listens to her. He's like, you know, he's willing to open up to her. And then especially when the shit goes down, he's like, I want to understand, you know.
Well, that's the thing is it's the understanding and the compatibility outside of like surface level qualifications that would go up on your Tinder profile, you know.
That makes me think that these people haven't actually had real relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you know, you don't. I mean, it's convenient. There are traits I think that people gravitate towards that they like, but you know, the heart wants what it wants, you know, and when you have a connection with somebody, it goes a lot deeper and getting into the biological, you know, that understanding that mystery, you know, that is still something that scientists are working on, doing all these tests, like, you know, do girls like this smell or that smell, and like, you know, what are the things that release pheromones? Yeah. I saw that people blogs asked about like, why is she interested in him? Like, what?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I think that I think what you're always up against when you make a romance is that no matter how well you've done it, and no matter how accomplished the film is, there's always going to be people that just for whatever reason from their own personal experiences, they don't understand what maybe one of the characters sees in the other characters. And it can work both ways. It could be the man or the woman. But it's an interesting phenomenon that it's like, you know, most people, I'd say, something like 80% of the audience is like, yeah, I like both of them. I love the love story. I love the fall in love. And then there's some people that are just like, I don't understand why Louise doesn't talk like the vampire Lestat. Why isn't she, you know, like, why isn't she profoundly wise and eloquent after 2,000 years? Bothers. And there's other people that are like, why did she like that bro? Why did she like that bro? And it's like, oh, no.
He's not a bro.
We don't think so either.
I don't think so either.
He literally says, I hate these guys.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. I mean, no matter who you...
It's very realistic, actually. I think a lot of women are drawn to guys with baggage. And, you know, they like somebody because they have nuance. You're like, oh, this guy has a history. He's got like, you know, I want to help him. I want to, you know, make him feel better. I bet he'll love me. You know, he'll be able to connect with me when he hasn't been able to connect with other people. So women are actually very drawn to guys that seem alienated and who've got baggage.
Mm-hmm.
That is like catnip. Women love that. They're like, oh, issues. Awesome. I love this. And her issues are way bigger than his. I mean, he's like the most normal person on the planet compared to her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're both, I mean, even though they don't know it, at the beginning of their relationship, they have loss of their parents in common. They don't know it yet, and they don't know it. They won't know until the very end. But
They know what it feels like to be alone.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. So you guys' next project is going to be about Aleister Crowley.
Should be.
Yes.
I'm really excited about that. Uh, and I
Us
was
too.
wondering, why were you guys drawn to him as a character?
Well, he's Justin's granddad.
Really?
No. Well, maybe. No, he had a lot of
I'm
illegitimate
like the most
children.
gullible person on the planet. I would actually believe that if you
Well, there's no reason to doubt it, but yeah.
told
Uh,
me.
well, no, it's. I mean, there's something that we're trying to bring into every little thread of the project, but it's basically like outside of ourselves, our films are reviewed as something that is, fresh and rebellious and, youthful and experimental in some ways. Not experimental film, but you get the idea. That's not. I'm just trying to be descriptive off of like what others have said there, but because I hate people who label themselves as a rebel. But but the OG, Hellraiser, the OG guy who's just like, fuck the system because it needs to get fucked, is Aleister Crowley. He was the first person to realize that, like, saying inflammatory things gets you attention in the press because he was at the forefront of globalization where that could actually travel. And, he was on this grand spiritual quest where he wasn't like, okay, which religion do I subscribe to? Which one's the right one? He was just checking them all out and piecing together the stuff that made sense to him, of course. And he's trying out sex and drugs and magic and kind of living this rather hedonistic lifestyle. But it was actually, yes, it is like very convenient to his libido, but it's also something that he believed, as long as you just don't hurt anybody, that people should live completely freely. It's all very beautiful ideas when you start, and then when you take it to its logical extreme, it ends where Aleister Crowley ended, which was a penniless heroin addict alone. And but that's the thing is like we see a lot of that. We see a lot of the healthiness and intrigue and all of that. And also, we just can't believe he's like the greatest untold story of all time. And somehow it hasn't been told. And we're like, okay, I think we might be the right people, the perfect people to do it.
I
I
think
hope
you guys
so.
are actually. Well, somebody did. He did like a
No,
documentary thing.
that movie does not count. And I'm not saying because it's bad. I'm saying because it's not even about Aleister Crowley.
So
Crowley, I
you're
mean?
talking about. I was talking about Kenneth Anger actually. He did like a documentary thing.
Yeah, yeah,
He's famously very very into Crowley.
yeah.
Yeah. He's interesting though. He is one of those people that probably not privately, but publicly he seems to worship the caricature of Aleister Crowley. Um,
Mm. In the
he
hype?
what's that?
You mean like the hype of him?
Yeah, like he kind of worships the devil worshiper Aleister Crowley that never existed, and at least publicly, probably not privately at all.
Yeah.
Kind of plays up the he seems to sort of play up the Satan worshiping thing. But actually, it was funny. Aaron has this thing he always says about the movies we make, and he says that we typically make movies that you think about the next day for the next week, that something's left resonating with you. And I was reading this book last night called Aleister Crowley, Magic, Rock and Roll, and the Wickedest Man in the World.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a thesis to the book, it's that we should be thankful for Aleister Crowley in the sense that he gave us an extraordinarily entertaining cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that idea is, if you can communicate that in a dramatic narrative, that's something that resonates with people. That it's a really fun movie. It's really entertaining. There's a lot of interesting stuff along the way. There's a lot of creepy stuff along the way. But you've taken the idea that Aaron was just talking about of total freedom, and there was someone named Aleister Crowley who, in his life, he demonstrated where that can go really wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and again in an extraordinarily entertaining way.
Which is also a spiritual person to not comprehend or be able to apply the concept of temperance.
Mm-hmm.
But I have you read Diary of a Drug Fiend?
No.
I've read the first.
That is actually in the intro. It is a cautionary tale. It's a semi-autobiographical, but it's fiction. And he wrote it about his struggles with heroin and cocaine. And that's actually was my intro to Crowley, and I just loved him as a writer. Now, a lot of people are into him as like the mystic man, and it inspires me in that he was like an artist shaman, and that he, was just. I think his art was a part of his craft as well.
Yeah.
But that story is like him saying like this is. It was also kind of propaganda for his ethos of do what thou wilt.
That's some the author of this book that I was reading last night was saying was that he practiced Crowley's teachings for a while. He practiced OTO and maybe Thelema or something, and he said what he realized was that he suddenly felt like he was sort of being. He realized that form of worship. You start to realize more and more that it's a worship of Aleister Crowley. It's not a word you feel him in all of it, and it's so related to him that's why he left the faith basically was that, and he no longer practiced, was that he just felt like it was all created by this man, and the more you get into it, the more you're worshiping the man and not some idealist philosophy.
I think it's the way Crowley was the first practicing chaos magician.
Was a chaos magician?
Chaos magic. Have you heard of chaos magic?
I've heard the words, but because we kind of stopped at Aleister Crowley, we don't know the whole. We don't know the scope of magic.
It's kind of Grant Morrison says he practices, it, and Alan Moore, I think also, but it's basically the idea of spirituality and magical practice being kind of like a buffet / collage, where you basically just take what is useful to you at the moment and use it. Use the idea of, of do what thou wilt, and will, is, and magic, intention is, that you focus on something and then you use your energy to make it happen.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is basically manifestation of anything. You guys decided you wanted to make a movie. You first you dream it, then you start.
And a bunch of chaos magic, and then we're on set.
You're chaos magicians. And then you execute it. You start. And Crowley he took Eastern mysticism. He took like from all these different things and made his own personal practice. And it had to do with experiments too. I mean, he would take notes. He'd be like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this thing when the moon is here and that. I'm going to do some sex magic and see what happens. And he took notes, and, so it's very scientific. You are just seeing what works.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about him too that kind of differentiates him, is that he saw magic as a science, and that's what he thought he was going to prove, that this is a real thing that can be tested and all of that. But that goes as far back as alchemy, but
well, of course. And then, the modern development in all this is Carl Jung, because he kind of was the bridge between science and mysticism, psychology and mysticism. And because of him talking about things like archetypes, for instance, that is how things like the practice of chaos magic can happen now. Because you're like, say Superman is an archetype you really connect with. Mm-hmm. So you actually use that. You don't have to decide on one particular canon. It's just everything. If something is a thought form, if something is a presence, it's real. And the more that people believe in it, the more real it becomes.
Yeah. Well, he was a contemporary of Crowley. In fact, I think they even met.
Did they?
Yeah. I think so. I could be wrong, but I think they met in like 1910s or 20s.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, no. No. hang on, which one is it?
But they were in different
They were
places.
born at the exact same time. Let me look it up. Yeah, they were born on the same year.
Really?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think. I remember. Fuck, I can't remember. I'm almost positive they had some kind of interaction, and I don't remember if it was positive or negative.
Okay, wow. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Mhm.
I actually, I don't know how much. I mean, I was wondering what you guys thought about Kenneth Anger as a filmmaker, because he does apply the Crowley thing. Goes like what I love about Crowley is the art and the spirituality coming together, the magical practice, like as one thing. And Kenneth Anger he's the only director at least that has spoken about it openly, that is his intent. Like, with Invocation of Demon Brother and all that, like, he says, this is a spell. I am using sensory, I'm using the senses, sights and sounds and symbols. I'm putting those things together, and I'm putting this energy out into the world.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to have you guys heard of Antoine Artaud?
No.
Oh yeah, Antonin Artaud, the theatrical guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was fucked up, man. He
Well,
knew himself really well, but he
had
got.
this idea of theater of cruelty, and basically this was in, what was it, was it the 20s or earlier?
I think it was also the same kind of thing, like 1900s.
It's the same. Well, that's the thing. It's like, his idea of theater of cruelty for art is that he felt we need to revolutionize theater, which is what he was working on at the time. But I see it applied to film too. And he said you need to use sights and sounds and these sort of archetypal stories to break through people's perceptual walls and open them up. And people like Jim Morrison, the Doors, were actually very inspired by that. And he tried to do that with his shows. He tried to kind of have it be this mystical experience that he was taking people along on. And he was like the high priest sort of channeling energies.
Well, another thing that's really cool about Artaud is I remember he never does the same performance twice. Even from rehearsal to exhibition, he'll just never do it twice, which is kind of a cool idea of just kind of like, well, we already did it that way, and it's out in the world now, and so let's do it differently. Yeah. Which is, a different definition of what theater is, but it's still a really cool idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes it more live theater. It's more like life, You can't repeat a moment. A moment is past, and all the various factors that combine to make that moment happen are gone.
I think he died insane.
Yeah, he was schizophrenic.
Yeah.
He had this really cool theory about the Black Death that he wrote about in that book. He said that the Black Death happened because it was a external manifestation of a spiritual disease.
Well, that's not true.
Well, there's no way to prove that. But it's actually the cats. I found out it was the cats. It's because they were, at least a huge factor was they were superstitious and thought cats were like witch familiars and were evil and stuff. And so they killed all the cats, and the cats were killing the rats. So it spread.
Of course. Oh,
Don't
terrible.
fuck with the cats.
Sense.
But I was just wondering what you guys thought about art, if you had any thoughts of art in that way. Like, do you think you're putting energies out into the world and that it changes things?
Personally, I don't think of it in terms of any kind of metaphysical way. I do see it in much more in like a cultural context. Of just, I think progress is important. Moving forward in every way, artistically and technologically and all of it. And actually it's all intertwined, of course, technology and culture and everything. So I think, Justin and I luckily have very few attachments in that we can actually maybe live on that bleeding edge a little bit and try to, push things forward or at least just do things that haven't been done before, whether or not that's going forward or sideways or whatever, at least it's not backwards. And that's important to us. Um, I would say, yeah, that would probably be part of our mission statement if we have one.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, I think I'm excited about it. If you do get a chance, you should read Diary of a Drug Fiend
Cool.
because it kind of, especially if you're writing this character, it's kind of I don't know. At least I feel that it's kind of the most intimate view of him that you could get.
Hmm.
It shows his self-perception, and it shows his artistic soul. He has this one poem in there that's like my favorite poem of all time. Whenever I get drunk, I end up reading it to people.
Hmm.
One of the interesting things about the complexity of Crowley is that he has an enormous ego. He is he is so into himself.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and and that ego is something that he gets. I don't know. It's a big part of his self destruction and so many failed relationships and endeavors and so many things. Um, but he's simultaneously so self-aware to the point of like he can even have a really great sense of humor about himself and about that. He can't correct it, but he's got a good sense of humor about it. And I feel like that's a pretty rare thing. I think most people with gigantic egos in history who make big mistakes, they didn't have a real sense of like they were what most of us would call crazy.
yeah,
Like completely nuts. Like they have no sense of self of like why these bad things are happening or why something didn't work.
yeah, yeah,
Like Hitler probably never had any idea why his plan didn't work.
yeah.
Not to say that Aleister Crowley is anything like Hitler,
No,
but they're two people both with gigantic egos.
yeah.
And
There's a lot of self-delusion.
yeah, but Crowley doesn't seem to have the self-deception that most people with giant egos have.
Hmm.
He's just incapable of reversing it. That's
Yeah,
all.
I think
Um,
he tried hard. I think, like it's interesting with Dive a Drug Fiend. I think he did. Obviously, he ended up doing heroin again. The book didn't help him to stop. But I think he thought at that time, I'm done with it. I've moved past this. I've kind of thought my way out of this addiction. And the book was supposed to be, his process of liberating himself as well as a guide to the reader to how for them how to liberate themselves from their addictions and do
yeah,
only what is the best thing for you to do and what is in your best interest. But he has this very high awareness of his vulnerability, and his weakness, how he is. Yeah, he had an incredible high level of self awareness. It's
Yeah.
I think that's probably what's most inspiring about him, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Um, It's somebody that I keep thinking of. I'm just gonna say his name because I think about him when I think about Kenneth Anger, and I think about him also with what you said about the ego. Is Charles Manson. There's somebody that if his paranoias hadn't driven him to do and think crazy things, he would have had it made. Like he had this whole freaking harem basically, and this like hippie cult harem that would just do whatever he wanted. And
Mhm.
then he started to be like, oh my god, the race war is gonna happen. We gotta like, stockpile weapons and dune buggies and hide out in the desert because then we'll be the leaders of, all that started rolling, and it started that crazy train rolling. But if he hadn't been quite so crazy, but then again, if he hadn't been quite so crazy, he wouldn't have gotten all those people so into him because he converted them to the cult of him. He's like,
Yeah.
I am your guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he could have really had it made.
He totally had it. He had
Not
drugs
started
and chicks.
having people kill people.
He had this thing with like because he had all these dealings with bikers, like drug dealing, and he had like a hand signal he would do, and all of the girls would that meant strip and suck.
Mhm.
Can you imagine? I mean, that's horrible, but like, can you imagine that power? You're like, yeah, do it, and they just do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you just group him in with other similar cult leaders, and especially kind of spiritual cult leaders from the 60s and 70s, when they lose their self-awareness and they get so taken over by ego and by the idea of themselves as sort of a holy, profound figure, then the next steps are usually, okay, so I've spoken to whatever Messiah or whatever, and I've gotten the signal, and it's like, says I got to have like 6 wives. It turns to polygamy is always the big one. It's like you justify your male libido and like, yeah, you want to have sex with lots of people, or a person. I shouldn't even say male, I should say a person's libido. It's like, yeah, I've decided. But the thing is about those guys is I don't think in their head they're like scheming like, oh, if I say that it's a spiritual thing, that I think there's actually so much self-deception that they truly believe that it's part of the spirituality to practice something like polygamy, and then a lot of times then it does also switch to murder.
Yeah.
And it usually has some greater purpose.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes from a personal need. You know, Charles Manson had a really shitty life, and I think already from a young age he felt he was not deserving of love, and he had to trick people into loving him and into giving him what he needed. And that just was the way he operated. So he might have, you know, really genuinely liked a lot of these people. You know, some of those girls were his favorite. He loved, you know, Squeaky Fromme was like his top girl, and I'm sure he really liked her. But at the same time, I don't think he was capable of like genuinely trusting somebody with his heart. It's all about manipulation. So any kind of real human connections that he could have made, and he met, you know, what's his name, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, and totally fucked up that relationship, by taking advantage of him. You know, he had a lot of things, good things that could have happened in his life, and because he treated people like objects, it all blew up in his face.
Yeah. I was listening to a thing about Charles Manson on the radio a few months ago, and it's kind of strange because it's hard to remember, like, oh yeah, that's right, he did all these awful things, but that guy's alive to this day.
Yeah.
And he's a man.
I know somebody that knew that star chick that was
tried to marry him.
Yeah, that's so crazy. He met her when she was like younger, and like said her parents were like, they were like trying to date. And he said her parents were like really strict, like religious, and they wouldn't let her like leave the house or anything. And yeah, it didn't really go very far because of that. But
yeah, he's just a guy. It's weird because you kind of see him, you know, all you really see is him with the swastika and making crazy faces and all of that, and then you realize that it's just this really pathetic guy desperately trying to be remembered and not and he's just looking for attention. And it's weird because you realize it more and more the more you look into it, the less he gets out of the media haze and more he gets into just like he's a person like I'm a person and like you're a person. And like he's just a person with these stupid ideas that are so crazy that they get attention, and somehow people are like afraid of this man, but he's just a guy. He's this guy. You know, it's just trying really hard to make it seem like he knows more than he does about things.
Well,
and that's it.
Like nobody can do something on their own. You know, not to say that Charles Manson and Hitler weren't bad people, but if you are just like a lone crazy person saying, "Oh, we need to kill all the Jews," or you know, "We need to go and kill some movie stars," if everybody around them is like, "Fuck you, that's crazy," no.
Right.
And it wouldn't happen. You know, he wasn't the one that went. And Hitler was not personally doing everything that was being done. But having those people that are like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. That's what makes it happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, it's got interesting. All right, let me see. Do I have any other questions? Is there anything else you guys would like to talk about? What was it like going to? Did you guys go to con?
Kind of. Do you mean with the film? No.
Yeah, no. Did you go
No, we
to?
went to Toronto.
Okay.
And it was, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say. It's awesome. Like, as a filmmaker, I mean, it's a dream to premiere at Toronto. You always want to premiere at Toronto. Um, so yeah, that was huge. We did go to Cannes to get the film packaged, and that was a nightmare. We kind of went there on a lark, hoping to get an Italian producer and a location scout, and hopefully some financing and maybe cast or something. And we went there. I shouldn't say on a lark, but it was more like just a crazy idea that these two dudes had, not knowing if it would work.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no money at all. We just kind of like paid to stay in like basically one bedroom place with 3 people for 10 days in a place 30 minutes of a bike ride outside of the city. We'd bike there back and forth, but it was the rainiest year ever, so it was always raining when we went to and from places. We'd arrive at meetings like 30 minutes late because we'd just be soaking wet. Not that late, actually. We're never that late. But we'd arrive just soaking wet, and we were wearing these cheap H&M suits, to look like professionals, and it was just muck disaster. But it worked. We got the movie made. So.
Well, at least you can get pneumonia.
Yeah. And at least we left Cannes with something, which is pneumonia. Yeah.
Somebody wanted me to ask you if you could do a superhero movie, is there one that you would want to do?
One that hasn't been done?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could do a new take on something. No, just whatever.
I'd just remake The Dark Knight shot for shot.
So Batman?
Yeah, well, there's a cheap answer. I guess technically Jesse Custer is a superhero. I mean, he has a superpower. He's in a comic book, so I guess
he's for sure a superhero.
Yeah, it'd be Preacher, but then
badass.
There's a Batman story by Grant Morrison called Arkham Asylum.
Yeah.
That one could adapt and make a really good movie out of it.
That would be amazing.
And the reason I bring that up is that most of the Nolan movies are actually, at their best, actually, they are actually adaptations of material that already existed. Batman Begins is year one, basically.
Right.
The Dark Knight is The Killing Joke with some other stuff, and Dark Knight Rises is I forgot the one with the storyline with Bane, but it's basically the same story. And I think you can do the same with Arkham Asylum. And the cool thing about Arkham Asylum is it's a totally standalone, fun piece that plays with the psychology and the mythology of Batman we already know, and several of like the more interesting villains in a really dark, cool environment.
Arkham Asylum is cool as hell.
Yeah.
That would be really
Yeah.
Preacher
was. Aleister Crowley's in it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I haven't read it in a while.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. Man, I don't want this to end. Do you have any questions for me or anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, the only other thing that pops into my head that we've never actually talked about, but it's funny, is the movie's been out there and it has a life of its own, and we constantly see the chatter about it on Twitter and read all the reviews and stuff. And we've been incredibly blessed at how positive it's all been. It's all been a dream come true. And I'm not complaining, but just an interesting observation is that the primary conversation about the movie, almost always in tweets, whatever, it's always the idea of the quote-unquote, the genre bending of it. And the separation of horror and romance. And it's weird how you get kind of numb to it. You see it over and over again. It doesn't bother you. But it's weird how something that was never a discussion point in the making of the film becomes the primary discussion point of the film as it lives out in the world. That's weird. It's a really odd thing. And especially since usually when it's referenced, and especially if it's referenced in like a review or anything else, the assumption is that was the intent by the filmmakers.
Okay.
It's always treated as like assumed intent. This is what they were trying to do. Wow, they really pulled off. When they set out to make a horror romance, it's like, it's so weird how these things take on a life of their own. And to the point where sometimes I forget. I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. We did that. And it's like, wait, we never did that. We never even talked about it.
I,
Yeah, but like every film we make, it's always about just like there's an interesting idea, do what feels right in the moment, and then it's out in the world, and
yeah.
it becomes yeah weird.
It's very, I think people just notice how original it is, and I think it's just people are used to, you know, having to I mean, the column I write is supposed to be for noir, and so I kind of try to look for different movies. I don't really do like what people would typically think of, like, oh, that's a noir. I basically, if there's a movie I feel like there's stuff I want to talk about, I'll figure out how to say it's a noir.
Yeah,
Um, like I did Sophia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, which I don't think it would be like, oh, that's a noir totally, But I kind of talked about like how it's kind of a tragic, story of like she's fucked if she does, fucked if she doesn't. She was born into this role. She did what she did. She was trying to kind of live life on her own terms. At least that's how like Sophia tried to approach it. She didn't want to have it be political at all. But the thing is, it is political. She was like the queen that maxed out France, basically. Like she was the straw that broke the camel's back.
yeah,
So there's something just very tragic about it because she really was. If she had been like, oh, let's not spend so much money and let's be considerate, the people in the court would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? This is how we do things.
Mhm.
So your guys' movie, I wanted to talk about it. I don't know if people would think this is a noir per se, but it does have some noir themes. Um, it's very positive for if
yeah,
that was to categorize it as a noir,
yeah.
which I think is what's to me, what was unpredictable about it was that it was a different kind of love story. Like a lot of times a love story, it either focuses on like this nice progression upwards of like them coming together and maybe there's some few things that get in the way,
Mhm.
or it's everything just tragic and going to shit. It's just a thing that's not going to work out. And this story, I felt it was a lot more realistic to how things really happen. I think I love that I feel like it had a really positive message, um, and shows the real darkness that is there. And when you open yourself up to somebody, there's always danger. So
Yeah,
I thought
yeah,
it was really beautiful and a really beautiful, just concise take on a love story.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. We tried to have the romance, their romance play out as kind of representative of anyone's first like 6 weeks in a relationship, but under extraordinary circumstances. They're
Yeah,
a little bit more fun to watch. It's funny though, the whole idea of the movie being a hybrid. I think that the moment you set out to make a monster movie, you just assume it's like, oh, we're making a monster movie. That's all I ever thought it was. And I just thought, well, when movies have good characters, they're good movies, and movies have bad characters, they're bad movies. So if we make a monster movie with good characters, then we're making a good monster movie. I think that's
yeah,
always what I thought it was, but it's weird when it's out there and the debate becomes over whether it's a monster movie or a romance. It's like, it's
yeah.
just a good monster movie.
Well, people love to categorize. It makes
Uh,
things simpler. I honestly, what I see, especially as a writer and a film lover, is a good story, and it is about the characters. And to me, a lot of horror movies, especially um, the classic horror stories, they are about um, relationships and about people. Like The Wolf Man, for instance, with Lon Chaney Jr. Um, that's like the first real classic werewolf movie. So people would say, "Oh, that's a werewolf movie," you
yeah,
know. But when I watch it, I see it as a character study of Lon Chaney Jr.'s character, and I see it, about somebody that is grappling with their inner darkness and is trying to connect with somebody, um, and he plays it so beautifully. Like as an actor, you have to be aware of those things. You have to be aware of what is this really about for me. But when it's marketed, then they're like, this is a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true.
Yeah. But yeah, this is good stuff. Uh, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for wanting to talk to us. Appreciate it.
For talking to me. It's,
Let us know what comes of it, and hit us up on Twitter for whatever, or email or phone call, show up at Justin's house, whatever you want to do.
that would be cool. If I was in LA, I would totally want to hang out.
Sounds good.
But I'm not. But yeah, this has been great, and thank you guys.
Thank you.
Talking to you.
Talk to you later.